British journalist and author, currently the Daily Telegraph defense editor. Welcome to النهار, Khan.
Very good to be with you.
3 years into the war in Ukraine, a new dynamics seems into play. Ukraine no longer seems able to count on Washington's support, and Putin seems on the verge of emerging from international isolation. First, do you agree on this assessment?
Yes, I think things are changing very fast on the Ukraine issue. First of all, we've seen a very big change in American policy. Under the Biden administration, Washington was very, very supportive of the Ukrainian war effort. But since Trump has come to power, there's clearly been a big change. First of all, Trump wants to reestablish relations with Russia. And secondly, he clearly has a very different view of whether Washington should continue supporting Ukraine, because it's cost the Americans a lot of money. And Trump clearly doesn't believe that it's in America's interest to carry on supporting Ukraine. So many things have changed.
Do you think that things on the ground has led to this changing dynamics?
No, I think the real change is in Washington. I think Trump coming to power and having a very different view, and the people in the Trump administration that surround him, like J.D. Vance, they've been very critical of American support for Ukraine. And while Ukraine is continuing to fight its war with Russia and has had some success on the ground, this different attitude and approach in Washington is really going to change things. And what Trump wants is the war to end. And we get the feeling that Trump doesn't really care what Ukraine wants, it's what he wants.
And do you think Europe will be able to fill the gap if the Trump administration withdraw its support?
Well, that's a very good question. And I think in strict military terms, I think the Europeans would struggle to provide the same level of support that the US has given Ukraine during the past 3 years. But I think for the moment, what the Europeans are trying to do is trying to sort of get involved in the negotiations, because the talks that took place in Saudi Arabia this week were between Russia and America, and the Europeans were not present. But British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer is going to Washington next week, and he's going to try and persuade the Trump administration to allow the Europeans to have a role in the talks. So we'll have to see what the outcome of that is.
Is it reasonable to have a negotiation table that Europe isn't on it?
Well, I think Europe has, like America, Europe has given Ukraine a lot of support. And a lot of European leaders see Russia's aggression in Ukraine as a threat to European security. And I think if you look at, some of the comments we've heard from NATO leaders in the last year, there is genuine concern in Europe that if there's a bad deal in Ukraine, that could ultimately threaten the peace and stability of Europe if Russia feels encouraged to engage in more acts of aggression.
What kind of deal do you foresee?
Well, it's very hard to see. I mean, at the moment, Russia holds Ukrainian territory, the Ukrainians hold Russian territory, and I think fundamentally, any deal will be about land and who controls which land in Ukraine. Zelensky said many times that he wants all of Ukraine back under Ukrainian control. I think a lot of people outside Ukraine think that this is wishful thinking, and that any peace deal will probably be settled on the land each side occupies at the moment. But as I said, there are lots of negotiations to take place, so we will have to wait and see what the future peace deal looks like.
We were seeing this week negotiations in Riyadh and President Zelensky visiting UAE. What kind of role can Arab states or the Gulf states play in this settlement, potential settlement?
Well, I think they have a very important role to play. And I think the fact that Saudi Arabia has hosted the first direct talks between the Americans and Russians in more than 3 years is quite a significant step. And I think both sides see that the Gulf states, the UAE, the Saudis, etc., are neutral. They have good relations with both sides. And therefore, the fact that they can talk openly with both sides, with Washington and Moscow, means that they have a role to play.
Mm-hmm. Or the transatlantic relation, or the relation between Europe and the USA, do you foresee a new era in the making?
I think the transatlantic relationship is going to be under a lot of strain. And fundamentally, the problem the Americans have, and this has been so for 2 decades, is a lot of Americans, both Democrats and Republicans, feel that Europe is not paying enough for its own defense. And until the Europeans, number one, start to increase their defense spending and not rely on America to protect their interests, I think there will be tensions. But as I said, Sir Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, is going to Washington next week. He's already called on European leaders during the meeting in Paris to do more to improve defense spending. So if Europe moves in the right direction on that issue, then a deeper rift between Washington and Europe can be avoided.
To wrap up, do you think 2025 will be the year of peace in Ukraine?
Well, certainly that's what Trump wants. And I think that Putin, Russian President Vladimir Putin, for his own reasons, needs to see this war end. You know, the Russian economy has suffered a lot. The Russian military has suffered a lot. And I think Putin will be looking for a way to end this conflict. But, you know, after 3 years of suffering, the Russians will want a deal that makes them look good. So I think there's going to be a lot of talk about Ukraine this year, and we'll have to see if it ends in peace.
Will we be seeing Putin back into the G8 soon?
Well, Trump wants him back in the G8. I'm not sure how many other countries want him back in the G8. But, I mean, Putin will be looking for complete rehabilitation on the international stage. And the fact that Trump is now saying that Ukraine is to blame for the war, not Russia, gives the Americans at least an argument in favor of readmitting Russia to institutions like G8.
Thank you, Khan. It was great talking to you. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Mona Lisa.